In the quiet heat of an early January morning, a foreign aid worker stepped off a plane at Ouagadougou International Airport. Clad in modest, neutral-toned clothing and carrying a backpack marked with the logo of a well-known international NGO, she looked every bit the image of a humanitarian. She was introduced as Claire Dubois, a French national working with a European-funded mission to support community health and education in Burkina Faso's vulnerable northern provinces. The arrival of such figures was not unusual. Western aid workers, journalists, and diplomats often moved in and out of the country under various official capacities. But this one was different. She spoke fluent English and French, knew bits of local dialects, and had extensive credentials. Her resume included work in Congo, Mali, and Chad. Her background was spotless, on paper. The NGO sponsoring her claimed she had been vetted and cleared by French authorities and the European Union. Local media highlighted her commitment to human rights and her passion for African stability. Photos of her attending community meetings and smiling with local children were quickly circulated online. At face value, she was everything the international community praised: educated, empathetic, and mission-driven. But within days of her arrival, whispers began to circulate. Government officials noted how she seemed unusually interested in security logistics. During a briefing on civilian displacement in the Sahel, she asked detailed questions about troop positions, drone patrols, and border surveillance protocols, topics unrelated to health or education. Aid workers who had spent years in the region quietly remarked on her confidence navigating military-adjacent zones, places most volunteers avoided. She was granted access to high-level meetings through her NGO's network and was often seen photographing infrastructure, including bridges, government offices, and communication towers.
Captain Ibrahim Traoré had seen this before. Since taking leadership in 2022, he had repeatedly voiced concerns about foreign operatives working under the disguise of NGOs, journalists, and humanitarian workers. His intelligence advisors noted that many of these individuals entered under the banner of peace and support, but operated with hidden agendas, gathering intel, mapping resources, and building informal influence networks. With Burkina Faso's bold stand against French military presence and growing alliances with anti-imperialist African nations, the stakes had become higher. Any form of internal penetration was now viewed not just as espionage, but as a threat to national survival. Traoré ordered a discreet background check. Within hours, inconsistencies began to surface. Her passport photo did not match archived travel documents. Her listed university had no record of her graduation. Even her name, Claire Dubois, appeared to be recycled, previously used in a minor embassy scandal in Senegal. Something was off, but the president didn't act hastily. Instead, he waited, instructing his intelligence team to monitor her closely. Surveillance teams began tracking her movements, listening to her calls, and mapping her network. She had come under the spotlight, though she didn't know it yet. In the eyes of Traoré and his team, this was no longer a routine arrival. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, a silent war being waged in plain sight. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young and resolute leader of Burkina Faso, was no stranger to deception. Having risen through the military ranks with a reputation for discipline, clarity, and national pride, he understood the hidden dynamics that often played out beneath the surface of diplomacy and aid. Since taking power, Traoré had made it clear that Burkina Faso would no longer bow to foreign pressure or manipulation disguised as partnership. His ideology was straightforward. Africa must stand for itself. But to uphold that vision, he had to remain vigilant, especially when those claiming to help came bearing too many questions and too few answers. When he was briefed about the arrival of Claire Dubois, it wasn't the fact that she was French that raised alarm, it was her behavior. She had embedded herself into government affairs far too quickly. In less than a week, she had been granted access to documents and locations that typically took months of clearance. Her NGO's credentials appeared valid, but Traoré knew from experience that Western intelligence agencies often used humanitarian outfits as fronts. This wasn't paranoia, it was historical reality. The same tactics had been employed in Libya, Syria, and throughout Central Africa. Traoré called for a special intelligence briefing. The top officers of Burkina Faso's newly formed counterintelligence unit, modeled after elite reconnaissance groups, assembled in the capital. The goal: discreetly monitor all of Dubois' movements without raising suspicion. Agents were placed within the NGO's operations. Surveillance drones, normally used for counterinsurgency, were repurposed to track her vehicle routes. Her hotel room was scanned, and digital forensics experts began cloning her electronic devices. What they began to find sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned security officials. Dubois' laptop contained files that were inconsistent with humanitarian work. Detailed satellite maps marked with military symbols, summaries of conversations with high-ranking Burkinabe officers, and lists of natural resource sites, including gold mines and lithium deposits, were among the contents. She was not merely observing or reporting, she was collecting and organizing intelligence. Her phone revealed encrypted messaging apps and contacts linked to overseas defense contractors and known Western operatives. Still, Traoré was cautious. He understood the optics. Detaining a Western woman on espionage charges without clear public evidence could backfire and draw international backlash. He knew the Western media could quickly spin the narrative, branding him a dictator suppressing aid workers. That's why he chose precision. He told his intelligence team, "We do not confront yet, we observe. Let her believe she is unseen." As the days passed, she grew more comfortable. She began requesting private meetings with local governors, military commanders, and even energy officials, claiming she was preparing a regional risk assessment report for NGO funding. In truth, she was mapping power. And all the while, Traoré watched. With every step she took, the noose quietly tightened. The trap wasn't ready yet, but when it would close, it would do so with undeniable proof. Burkina Faso was being tested, and Traoré, with quiet fury and unwavering calm, was preparing to respond. Not just for himself, but for every African nation still resisting unseen chains. By the second week of surveillance, the picture of Claire Dubois was no longer fuzzy. It was damning. While she maintained her humanitarian front in public, visiting schools, handing out food parcels, and posing for photos with children behind closed doors, a different reality was unfolding. Traoré's intelligence team had fully penetrated her digital world. Using advanced software and cyber forensic tools developed in partnership with regional allies, they cloned her devices and decrypted her communications. What they uncovered confirmed their deepest suspicions. Her laptop was a trove of classified intelligence. Among its files were detailed geospatial maps, not publicly available, marked with military outposts, weapons storage locations, and energy infrastructure. There were organized folders labeled in military shorthand: AOI, Area of Interest, FFR, Foreign Force Response, and Phase 2 Deployment. These were not the terms of a humanitarian. These were the markings of someone trained in field intelligence. But it was her communications that truly told the story. Encrypted messages had been sent from her phone to multiple offshore servers, many bouncing through proxy nodes in countries like Belgium, Switzerland, and finally terminating in France. These messages included summaries of military patrol patterns, estimates of drone surveillance reach, and assessments of Burkina Faso's air defense capabilities. Even more alarming was a PDF document titled Leadership Dynamics, BF, which contained detailed psychological profiles of Captain Traoré and his senior staff, an analysis likely crafted for the purpose of strategic manipulation or negotiation. One email, recovered from a backup cloud server, was especially revealing. Addressed to a redacted recipient, it read, "Target is exhibiting high-level suspicion. Recommend extraction within 5 to 7 days unless alternate route secured. Traoré's consolidation of regional alliances poses serious disruption to planned resource control operations." That single paragraph shattered any remaining doubt. She was not an aid worker. She was not even just an informant. She was a trained field operative engaged in what amounted to modern espionage. working on behalf of interests threatened by Burkina Faso's rise and regional defiance. Her mission wasn't about helping African communities. It was about monitoring, influencing, and potentially destabilizing the new wave of African sovereignty being led by men like Traoré.
The realization sent a ripple of resolve through the Burkinabe leadership. This wasn't merely a violation of trust, it was an act of infiltration, a reminder that the struggle for African self-determination was still very much alive, and that it had shifted from open wars to covert operations. Still, Traoré remained calm. Emotion, he knew, could be weaponized. What he needed now was not outrage, it was evidence, preparation, and timing. Every detail had to be documented, every trace preserved. A full intelligence dossier was prepared, including IP logs, decrypted files, timestamps, and cross-referenced witness accounts. The plan wasn't just to arrest her, the plan was to reveal her, to the nation, to the region, and to the world. The data didn't lie, and soon neither would the story. Captain Ibrahim Traoré now held the truth in his hands, but he knew that truth alone was not enough. In geopolitics, perception is power. If he moved too early, without an airtight case, without public proof, the international community could flip the narrative, turning an exposed spy into a misunderstood humanitarian and casting his government as paranoid or authoritarian. So he decided to strike with precision, timing, and undeniable evidence. The trap would have to be more than effective. It would have to be theatrical, irrefutable, and politically bulletproof. A team of high-level intelligence officers devised a plan. They would stage a fake high-level government meeting, designed to draw Dubois in. The bait was irresistible, an emergency security summit about regional unrest and new military cooperation agreements between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Leaked whispers were carefully fed through NGO and diplomatic circles, ensuring the information would reach her ears. The meeting would take place in a heavily surveilled building that had been prepared in advance with hidden cameras, microphones, and even electromagnetic sensors. The room itself was wired top to bottom. Every angle, every sound, and every object was monitored. The intelligence team even planted false documents in the room, fabricated plans of a joint drone system, and a fake map of classified arms routes, strategically placed on the table within view but slightly concealed, just enough to tempt a trained operative. Then they invited a handful of trusted participants to create the illusion of authenticity. As anticipated, Dubois took the bait. Posing as a liaison from her NGO's conflict prevention program, she requested a seat at the meeting under the guise of providing civilian impact data for the proposed operations. She arrived early, greeted participants warmly, and took a discreet corner seat. But it wasn't long before she began to act. When the participants stepped out for a scheduled coffee break, she made her move. First, she scanned the room with a small device hidden in her bag, likely to check for surveillance. But Burkina Faso's team had anticipated this and used advanced technology invisible to commercial scanners. She then carefully reached into her coat pocket and placed a tiny recording device under the center of the conference table. In another pocket, she had a pen with a micro camera, which she subtly aimed toward the stack of documents on the far side of the table. She took photos. She retrieved the planted papers. She did everything the team expected and everything they needed to seal her fate. Within minutes, plainclothes operatives entered the room and surrounded her. She froze, calm, composed, but unmistakably caught. They confiscated her bag, devices, and the surveillance tools she had planted. No force was necessary. She knew the game was over. She was escorted to a secure facility where forensic specialists immediately began analyzing her equipment, preserving the evidence trail in accordance with both national and international standards. Nothing would be left to interpretation. There would be no room for denial. The trap had worked, and soon, the world would see what Burkina Faso already knew. That beneath the mask of aid, a spy had been uncovered. The news broke like a thunderclap. On the morning of the fourth day after her arrest, the Burkinabe Ministry of Communication called an urgent press conference in Ouagadougou. Cameras from across Africa rolled in. International media correspondents, expecting a routine announcement, were instead confronted with a bombshell. With calm precision, a government spokesperson laid out the findings. A French national posing as a humanitarian worker had been caught conducting espionage inside Burkina Faso's borders. The evidence was presented piece by piece. Screens behind the podium displayed images of her encrypted messages, photographs of restricted military sites, and footage from the staged meeting where she had planted surveillance devices. Each exhibit was time-stamped and geo-verified. It was not speculation, it was fact. Even the tools she used were shown to reporters. The micro recorders, the camera pen, the scanning device. This wasn't a rogue volunteer with a camera. It was someone trained, funded, and deployed with clear intent. Social media erupted almost instantly. Hashtags like Gasham Spy in Disguise, Traoré was right, and Hands Off Africa trended across the continent. Pan-African commentators hailed the move as a masterstroke in African self-defense. Burkina citizens flooded the streets in support of Traoré, waving flags and singing patriotic songs. In a region long haunted by foreign manipulation, the exposure felt like a national vindication, a moment of truth breaking through years of deception. But while the public celebrated, diplomatic corridors trembled. The French embassy issued a carefully worded denial, claiming Dubois was an independent contractor working in a non-official capacity, and that France had no knowledge of any intelligence activity. But the Burkina government pushed back immediately. "We have the data, we have the trail, and we have the courage to say what others only whisper," declared a senior aide to Traoré. France summoned Burkina Faso's chargé d'affaires in Paris. In return, Ouagadougou summoned the French ambassador for questioning. Tensions soared. Other West African nations took note. Mali and Niger publicly praised Burkina Faso's action, calling it a necessary act of sovereignty. Leaders from Guinea, Chad, and the Central African Republic quietly requested intelligence briefings. In private, many admitted they had long suspected similar infiltration under the guise of NGOs, but had lacked the political will or capacity to act. Traoré had just set a precedent. Western media, meanwhile, struggled to control the narrative. While some outlets attempted to downplay the incident as a misunderstanding, others were forced to confront the evidence. Analysts on global panels debated whether France and other European powers were still using Cold War-era tactics to maintain influence over former colonies. It became increasingly difficult to defend the idea of benevolent intervention when a supposed aid worker had been caught red-handed gathering intelligence on a sovereign government. Captain Traoré remained silent for now. He understood the gravity of the moment. He had not just captured a spy, he had revealed a system, a method, a legacy of control hidden beneath layers of diplomatic language and humanitarian theater. The world was watching, and Burkina Faso had just redrawn the lines. In the wake of the exposure, Captain Ibrahim Traoré knew that Burkina Faso's victory was bigger than a single event. It wasn't just about catching a spy, it was about reclaiming African dignity, sovereignty, and voice. Traoré had always seen himself not merely as a national leader, but as part of a rising generation of African patriots determined to end centuries of covert domination. This moment was his opportunity to speak not just to his people, but to the entire continent. 5 days after the press conference, Traoré addressed the nation in a televised broadcast that was simulcast across Africa. Dressed in his military fatigues, standing before the national flag, he spoke not with anger, but with firm, unshakable resolve. "This was not the work of one woman," he said. "This was a method, a system, one that has operated in silence for decades. They come to us smiling, offering aid, asking questions, and building trust, not to serve us, but to study us, to control us, to divide us." His words resonated far beyond Burkina Faso. In Lagos, youth groups organized forums under banners reading "Africa for Africans." In Nairobi, civil society leaders held solidarity rallies, demanding transparency from foreign NGOs operating in the region. Across social media, clips from Traoré's speech were translated into Swahili, Amharic, Hausa, Zulu, and even Arabic. He had touched a nerve long ignored. The suspicion many Africans felt but often dared not voice, that much of foreign involvement in Africa wasn't about development or democracy, but about surveillance, influence, and extraction.
Traoré urged fellow African leaders to audit the presence of foreign personnel in their strategic sectors, especially mining, energy, defense, and telecommunications. "Let us not be polite with those who are not polite with our future," he declared. Sovereignty is not a slogan. It is a practice. And it must be defended not just with weapons, but with intelligence, unity, and courage. He called for the establishment of a Pan-African intelligence sharing platform, an alliance of African states committed to exposing covert foreign interference. He offered Burkina Faso's own resources and digital forensic teams to help train others. "We cannot afford to fight alone," he said, "but together, we are a storm." The response was swift. Days later, officials from Mali and Niger flew into Ouagadougou to discuss deeper security coordination. Guinea sent its own delegation. The African Union, under quiet pressure from multiple member states, began drafting a policy review on foreign NGOs and their legal scope. For the first time in years, African leadership wasn't just reacting to global events, it was shaping them. But it wasn't all celebration. Traoré also received death threats. Western diplomats warned of economic consequences. Funding for some NGO programs was frozen. He knew this was the cost of truth, but he also knew it was the price of liberation. What had begun as a quiet suspicion had become a call to arms, without blood, without bombs, but with the one weapon colonial powers feared most: awareness. Back in Paris, the mood was less triumphant, more chaotic, defensive, and increasingly desperate. What had been a carefully crafted illusion of benevolent oversight in Africa had just been shattered by a 35-year-old military leader from Ouagadougou. France's foreign ministry went into crisis mode, holding closed-door meetings with intelligence officials and scrambling to coordinate damage control across European embassies. The press, sensing blood, began probing deeper into Claire Dubois' background, only to find doors rapidly slamming shut. Dubois, once paraded in NGO newsletters and humanitarian conferences as a model field officer, was now a ghost. Her official LinkedIn profile disappeared. Mentions of her work in previous conflict zones were quietly scrubbed from websites. French state television ran a brief segment questioning the legitimacy of Burkina Faso's claims, but failed to present any counter-evidence. It was clear the government was trying to minimize the incident. But the genie was out of the bottle. Opposition parties in France seized the moment. In the National Assembly, heated debates erupted over the ethics and consequences of covert operations in former colonies. Some accused President Macron's administration of hypocrisy, preaching democracy and transparency abroad while running secret intelligence programs under the guise of humanitarian aid. Left-wing deputies demanded a formal inquiry. Right-wing voices, meanwhile, fumed at the loss of control in the Sahel and accused Traoré of anti-French propaganda. But outside the marble halls of government, the fallout was worse. French NGOs operating across Africa faced backlash and suspicion. Offices in Bamako, Niamey, and Conakry reported protests, vandalism, and staff departures. Several organizations were expelled from countries allied with Burkina Faso. Local African workers who had once partnered with French aid agencies now distanced themselves, fearing guilt by association. The French intelligence community, embarrassed and compromised, began conducting internal audits to determine how Claire Dubois had been uncovered so thoroughly. Whispers circulated in European security circles that Burkina Faso had received technical assistance from non-Western powers, possibly Russia or Iran, in detecting and decrypting covert communications. Though unconfirmed, the idea that France was now being outmaneuvered in Africa, not only politically, but technologically, sent a chill through Europe's elite. And the diplomatic fallout was just beginning. France's ambassador to Burkina Faso was recalled for consultations, a thinly veiled admission of failure. Economic cooperation talks were frozen. Funding to several development projects was quietly suspended. But the pressure didn't stop Traoré. In fact, it emboldened him. In subsequent interviews, he doubled down, stating, "If they reduce aid, we will build our own path. We are no longer beggars in our own land." Back in France, public trust in foreign policy continued to erode. A growing number of French citizens began questioning why billions were being spent on maintaining influence in Africa, while poverty, immigration tensions, and inflation grew at home. The Claire Dubois incident had not only damaged France's credibility abroad, it had sparked uncomfortable questions at home. Traoré had not just exposed a spy, he had exposed a system, and France was now facing its reckoning. The captured spy became more than just an agent of foreign intelligence. She became a symbol of how deeply foreign powers still try to insert themselves into Africa's affairs, and of how leaders like Ibrahim Traoré are rewriting that narrative. For millions watching across the continent, the message was clear. Africa is no longer a playground for foreign influence. It is rising, assertive, aware, and unafraid to defend its future.